temos a nossa palestra que vai encerrar o nosso colóquio com Jeff Cramer, que eu vou apresentar agora muito brevemente. Ele é o editor de diversas publicações de Thoreau, incluindo a edição anotada, que tanto nos ajuda com pesquisas para decodificar os símbolos e as referências. Ele editou esse aqui, entre muitos outros. Ele ganhou diversos prêmios e é responsável pela maior coleção de itens de Thoreau no mundo inteiro. Então, Jeff é responsável pela curadoria. Welcome, Jeff, and it's all yours. Ramble on. Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to thank Carolina for inviting me to speak here tonight to you all and to Eduardo and to all who helped put together this remarkable colloquium. It's quite impressive, the speakers you've had, and I know how difficult it is to put something like this together. Tonight's talk will be a little different than what I usually do. I tend to focus on a particular book I just published and the hows and the whys of that book. But instead, tonight, it'll be a night of stories and thoughts and discoveries that have come about through thinking and writing and talking to people about Thoreau for the last 50 years. And so, like Thoreau, I should not talk so much about myself if there were anybody else whom I knew so well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and my connection to Thoreau and how it also has melded together. I went to the woods for the second time, in the summer of 1978, which had it been my first would have been my last. The first time I ever visited Walden was in that previous winter, and I'd gone with a friend whose interest in Thoreau was pretty minimal. She went for me, I went for Thoreau, and neither really got what they wanted. I went to the woods, as many go on a pilgrimage, to pay homage to Thoreau. And I had admired his writings for years and years and felt a need to get a little closer to that one place on earth that would forever be linked with his name, Walden Pond. Having a belief in the power of relics and holy land, what the poet Philip Larkin once called serious earth, I felt that breathing the air that Thoreau breathed and touching the waters in which he bathed, I could conjure up something that his name symbolized. And I believed, like a lost soul searching for persuasion, that at Walden I would find Thoreau, although I did not have any clear concept as to what that really was, or what I even hoped to find. And as I was later to learn in an almost complete about face, Thoreau is not to be found at Walden Pond, or on the top of Mount Katahdin, or on the Concord River. He's found in the written word. So I'd like to use some of Thoreau's words tonight to preface each small section of this talk, to use his words as a jumping off point before I do what I tend to do, ramble. Thoreau has said that when we aren't rambling in the fields of nature, we ramble in the fields of thought and literature. And so that is where I'm going to be rambling now. So the first quotation, and I wish somehow I could do different voices to emphasize that this is a quotation without having to say, here's a quotation, but here's the quotation. Who knows whence our education is to come? And I found that absolutely to be true. When I was in college, I was an English major, and I took that very, very seriously. I loved English literature that came out of Britain. And I really, which I know seems strange, I hated, really abominated American literature. I didn't like it. I didn't want to read any of it. And I tried to get through 4 years of college without ever reading an American author. And the only American author I read for my college work was Robert Frost. But I had a friend who said, you have to read this guy Thoreau. So I picked up an anthology of Thoreau's writings and started reading it and was reading Walden. It was okay. There was no epiphany. There was no moment that changed my life. It was fine. But what I found was I absolutely loved the way he put sentences together, the way he put words together, the way he put sentences together in paragraphs. And I found the beauty of his writing mesmerizing. I absolutely loved it. So I kept reading him again and again, even though I was not always grasping what he had to say. But what I did find after a certain point was that what he did have to say really resonated with not who I was, but who I wanted to be, the better person I wanted to be. So I kept reading him until I got to a point where it sort of became just a very central part of my life. And so I read a lot of Thoreau, I was studying a lot of Thoreau, and back in Concord, Massachusetts at the time, there was a place called the Thoreau Lyceum, and every so often they gave these seminars, and there was a seminar being taught by a man by the name of Tom Blanding, who's a great teacher and scholar, and I had no idea who Tom was. So when I went to the Lyceum for the first night of his multi-part series on Thoreau, I went up to him and just said, "Oh, who are you?" Meaning, where do you teach, or what amazing 3-volume book on Thoreau have you written, or just what are your credentials? Who are you? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "I'm a transcendentalist." And I thought, oh my God, this guy is crazy. I mean, you don't really meet transcendentalists anymore. And so I was a little worried, but I sat through and I realized, listening to Tom, that the ideas of transcendentalism and what was sort of central to who they were and what they wanted to be was really who I was, or who I wanted to be. And so for me, after listening to Tom talk about it, I realized that I could actually say I am a transcendentalist. You don't want to say it at a dinner party. When they realize you're serious, they just kind of look askance at you and feel like they want to get away. But it meant something to me. And what I also found in thinking about Thoreau, talking about Thoreau, is that there's this iconic figure, but the stories that I love most are the stories that make Thoreau human, make him a real person. So I want to tell this story, or read this story from my last book, which was called Solid Seasons. It's about the friendship between Thoreau and Emerson. And so in early 1858, Emerson wrote that he was especially sensible of Thoreau's merits as a surveyor, as he had just now, by better surveying, quite innocently made 60 rods of woodland for me, and left the adjacent lot, which he was measuring, larger than the deed gave it. That's a surveyor for you. And Emerson's faith in Thoreau's surveying skills let his friend play a practical joke on him later that year, when Sam Staples, the man who we know was the man who arrested Thoreau for non-payment of taxes, bought Kettle Farm next to the Emerson home. And Thoreau ran the lines for him and found that a ditch that Staples had dug following the line of Emerson's orchard and meadow was incorrectly located. What was thought by all to be part of Emerson's land was actually his new neighbor's property. And although the error was to no one's blame or discredit, Thoreau found an opportunity to tease his friend. "We'll call Emerson down and show it to him," he said. And Staples had no interest in this issue and told Thoreau to just let it be as it is. But Thoreau insisted, "I'll get Emerson down here." So Thoreau went up to the house and got Emerson to follow him down to the property line. And standing on the border of the two properties, Thoreau taunted his friend, "I didn't think this of you, Mr. Emerson, stealing so much of Sam Staples' land here." Emerson was troubled by the dispute, offering right away to buy the land from Staples, who would hear none of it. "I dug the ditch there, supposing the hedge was the line," Staples said. "'Twasn't your fault. 'Twas the man you bought of showed you where to put the hedge. Let it be as the ditch is now." But Thoreau delighted in this joke and teasing his friend. And I love the fact that this is something we don't normally see in Thoreau, that sense of a practical joker or kind of teasing his friends. But it affected Emerson enough that in Emerson's next book, he wrote, "Every man takes care that his neighbor shall not cheat him, but a day comes when he begins to care that he do not cheat his neighbor." So as I said, I love the stories that make Thoreau human. We had purchased, the Walden Woods Project had purchased a manuscript leaf from his essay, his lecture, Moonlight. And on the back, he had written to himself, it says, "If my pages were written in a larger character, I would extinguish these lamps and stand by a window, read them by the light of the moon alone." And I love that, because he's thinking about how, as a lecturer, he's standing there and could make it more powerful or interesting. And the idea that he might want that moon to just shine on his manuscript and be reading by it. We also have this other journal page. And at the back of the journal, he's writing his signature over and over again, like any young author who is just thinking about someday when he gets to sign books. And so he's just signing his name over and over and over again. Or on his deathbed, he had teased his friend H.G.O. Blake about what turns a man's hair gray. And so there's these wonderful stories about Thoreau that make him very, very human. But I want to sort of circle back a little bit to how I got to do what I do. So Thoreau wrote, "Who can doubt that men are by a certain fate what they are, contending with unseen and unimagined difficulties, or encouraged and aided by equally mysterious, auspicious circumstances?" So how I got my job feels like that. It feels sort of like there were mysterious forces kind of working in my favor. And so for a long time, for 20 odd years, I worked for the city of Boston, Massachusetts, for the public library there. And I had long wanted to get out and had been a Thoreauvian for a lot of years. And so I was working on my first book on Thoreau called Thoreau on Freedom. And the editor said I should go out to what was then called the Thoreau Institute, but we now call the Walden Woods Project, to get a quotation, a lesser known quotation for the book, just to have something in there that most people won't know. And he said, you know, contact this person who works there and he'll give you something. So I contacted the person and told him what I needed. He said, come on out, I'll give you a disc with a couple of quotations on it. So I was heading out there, but 2 days before I went there, the head of the rare book department in Boston said, Jeff, you should meet this woman, Susan, we just hired. She used to be the curator at the Thoreau Institute. So when I went out there 2 days later, the guy handed me a disc and I said, do you have an opening? And he said, yeah, you interested? So as it turns out, they had done a nationwide search and could never find a candidate that was right for the job. I had been looking to get out of the city of Boston for years, never saw this job advertised. And so as it turns out, I think I am literally the only person who's a professional archivist or librarian who is also a Thoreau scholar. And so it kind of just melded together. So he told me what to do to apply for the job. I wrote to the executive director, was invited for an interview and all of that. And I was on my way. And then I got really, really nervous because you know how when you are in a situation where you're very nervous and you don't want to say the wrong thing, you usually say the wrong thing. So I didn't want that to happen. So I made a sort of pact with myself. So just as an aside, the Walden Woods Project is founded by a man named Don Henley, which some of you may know. He is founder of the Eagles, and he wrote the songs Hotel California. Way I said to myself, if I hear the Eagles on the radio because of Don Henley, this will be my job. And as soon as I said that, literally the song Hotel California started. And when we got to the parking lot, it was a gravel parking lot, and you could hear the tires on the gravel, and the sound of the song just faded perfectly as I parked the car. And I got out of the car knowing it was my job. I had a job offer within a week, and I've been there for almost 25 years now. These kind of fatalistic things actually do happen sometimes. Thoreau said, do not hire a man who does your work for money, but him who does it for love of it, which is nice, but we all have to pay the rent. But I do love it. I mean, I get opportunities to spend my day thinking about Henry David Thoreau, talking to people about Henry David Thoreau, helping researchers research Henry David Thoreau. So it's kind of an amazing place for somebody like me to be. Just a quick aside, the Walden Woods Project, we have a library there, for those of you who don't know, and our website is www.walden.org, so you might want to check it out. But we have multiple collections of the Thoreau Society, our own collections, the Margaret Fuller Society, all sorts of things, the Emerson Society. When you put all of our collections together, we have about 8,000 volumes there and about 60,000 documents, which virtually means that we have about 95% of anything ever published at any time in any language with Thoreau's name on it. So if you are doing any research on Thoreau, we would be a good place to come to. But we also help people virtually. So if you can't come see us, feel free to email and I can help you the best I can. We have a lot of things on our website. It's continually growing and growing and growing. So anyway, so as I said, I've been lucky. I've been very lucky in, for lack of a better term, my career path. And I say for lack of a better term because a career, according to the dictionary at least, is a job of series or related jobs that you do, especially profession, that you spend a lot of your working life in. But I don't just spend my working life in it. I spend my life in it. It has been my fate, and so it has been my luck to get to spend my days learning about Thoreau and sharing what I learn with students and researchers and visitors and doing this, talking to people like you about Henry David Thoreau. When I see a group of students and I ask them what they plan on doing with their lives, I often get the standard answer of got to go to this or that college with some career at the end of it in their minds, and no real sense of joy or pride in their choice. So I begin to preach a little bit about trying to wake them up. And because there's nothing really so exasperating as seeing a teenager with a 50-year career stretching in front of them, it doesn't excite them. It's not really a good place to be. So I talk to them about my favorite Thoreau quotation. Thoreau wrote, he wrote this in his journal, but it's in his first book, A Week on the Concord Merrimack Rivers. If I am not I, who will be? And I absolutely, it has grown to be the quotation I fall back on all the time, because we live in a world where we are not always forthcoming about who we are, what we represent, what our religion is, what our sexual preferences are, whatever it is. There are things that we hide about ourselves so that we fit in. And people do this in school a lot. You know, we all did it as teens, but we continue to do it as adults. And I realize that we need to be who we are. We need to be proud of who we are and put that forth, because if we can't be who we are and people aren't going to accept us, we don't want to be around those people anyway. We need to be around people who accept us for who we are. And I've always thought that if every school in the world had that sentence on the front of the school, so that every student walking into a school every morning of their entire educational time said, saw this thing, said, if I am not I, who will be? I can imagine the confidence it would instill in students and how differently they'd be treated and what a better place this might be. But I also like to talk to them about trying to find the things that make them happy. Making music, planting a garden, tuning a car engine till it hums, building something with wood, fixing a broken appliance or machine. I asked them to examine what their life would be like if they got to choose their passion as their life's work. And the response often comes down to the question of money, or not being able to make enough, which brings the question of what is enough? So here we get to those fundamental questions in Walden. But would they have enough to live on comfortably? Would they have enough to support a family comfortably? And is it worth some sort of financial sacrifice, if it is one, to be able to come home from work each day happy? Because happy is that part of it that, Thoreau said, surely joy is the condition of life. We want to be joyful in our life. And, I'm sure all of you have sat in rush hour traffic at, when people are coming home from work and they're angry and they're beeping their horns and they're just not too happy about the life they've chosen. So I tell them about this movie. It's called Ira and Abby, and it's not a good movie. So don't run out and try to find it somewhere on whatever streaming service you use. It's a really bad movie. But the reason I tell about it is because it's a very typical romantic comedy. Ira and Abby fall in love, and they meet under very strange circumstances. They fall in love, and about halfway through the movie or so, they argue over something very stupid, and they break apart. And then right 5 minutes before the end of the movie, they get back together and get married and live happily ever after. So a very typical movie. So what did they break up over? What was the problem? Well, the problem was that Ira accused Abby of not having a career. And she answered by saying, and I'm not quoting exactly, but basically what she says is, I have a job, I have an apartment, I have food on my back. I have food to eat. I have clothing on my back. I have friends. What more do I need? And that was such a Thoreauvian answer. It is figuring out what you need, having enough to be comfortable and happy, but you don't have to do more. So I talk to students about, like, if you were a musician and could be a studio musician playing a guitar or drums or whatever every day in a studio for some money and could earn enough money to live off of, playing weddings and bar mitzvahs, whatever, what a difference that would be to be able to practice your craft and do the thing that brings you joy all the time. And so I did this to a class once, and many, many times actually, but there's one time in particular where, a lot of times when you talk to students, you don't get much reaction, but the teacher emailed me the next day saying how those questions that I asked really got the students thinking about how they want to live and what they want to do. And one time a teacher said that one student in particular, after we had this discussion, said to her that she was having what she felt was a midlife crisis. And I felt, hearing that, like I got some kind of award. That it was just a great thing to hear, that she was having doubts about the path that she was on. Thoreau said, will you be a reader, a student merely, or a seer? How much do we want to be participating in the life around us? Do we want to just sit back, or do we want to be part of it? And so I think about a lot of what happened to Thoreau and what he became part of, but also how he got started. So the title of this talk is Thoughts from a Life with Thoreau, but it really should be Thoughts from a Life with Thoreau and that other guy, being Emerson. It's hard to begin a discussion of Thoreau without at least a brief bow to Ralph Waldo Emerson. I think this in no way diminishes Thoreau, but in fact adds something to an understanding of him, because Thoreau was a master at absorbing what had come before him and turning it uniquely into his own. That Emerson was an influence on Thoreau, and a strong one, was as it should be. But that Thoreau could take that influence and adapt it without being overwhelmed by it was the key to his strength and individuality. Neither Thoreau nor Emerson really wanted to create a generation of disciples or followers. They hoped to inspire original thinkers. Emerson once said, I have been writing and speaking what were once called novelties for 25 or 30 years, and have not now one disciple. Why? Not that what I said was not true, not that it had not found intelligent receivers, but because it did not go from any wish in me to bring men to me, but to themselves. I delight in driving them from me. This is my boast, that I have no school and no follower. I should account it a measure of the impurity of insight if it did not create independence. Or as Thoreau himself said, I trust that none will stretch the seams in putting on the coat, for I may do good service to him whom it fits. I meet a lot of different people who come to visit at the Walden Woods Project for various reasons, or who I meet at Walden Pond. And there are many who are, I think you could call them disciples, people who almost worship the ground that Thoreau walked on. And I think he would be exasperated if he ever could see that. I think he would be saddened that, and I think Emerson would too, that the lessons they are trying to put forth about independence and independent thinking and being your own person, if I am not I, who will be, that people are spending a lot of time kind of going where Thoreau went and seeing what Thoreau saw. The question is not, Thoreau said, where did the traveler go? What places did he see? It would be difficult to choose between places, but who was the traveler? How did he travel? How genuine an experience did he get? For traveling is, in the main, like as if you stayed at home. And then the question is, how do you live and conduct yourself at home? Which is really what everything Thoreau wrote was about. How do you conduct yourself? Walden, for instance, is not a book about a man living in the woods. It's just a book about a man living. How do I conduct my life in relation to my government, my church, my neighbors, my family, everything around me? How do I conduct my life in such a way that I am contributing to the world, giving myself a peaceful existence, and not harming anything? Edward Abbey, I'm hoping many of you know Edward Abbey, great essayist, writer, once wrote an essay called Down the River with Henry Thoreau. And in it, he was describing his thoughts as he read an old worn copy of Walden while going down a river in Utah. And Wendell Berry, again, another person I hope you've read his works, Wendell Berry described Abbey's essay this way. He said, "It is an essay in the literal sense, a trial. Mr. Abbey tries himself against Thoreau and Thoreau against himself. He tries himself and Thoreau against the river. He tries himself and Thoreau and the river against modern times and vice versa." Now, this is the value of Thoreau for me, or for about any great writer. This is the Thoreau against whom we should try ourselves. Not should, but against whom we must try ourselves, because Thoreau forces us to ask the questions we do not necessarily want to hear. And I find when I read Thoreau, those questions that are embedded in his writings, in his essays, in his journal, questions that he seems to be asking himself, but is also asking us, are just really, really important questions for thinking about how we exist, how we conduct our lives, what we're contributing to the world. Martin Buber, the Austrian philosopher, put it this way on the centennial of Thoreau's death. He said that Thoreau addressed his reader in such a way that the reader not only discovered why Thoreau acted as he did, but also that the reader, assuming him, of course, to be honest and dispassionate, would have to act in just such a way whenever the proper occasion arose, provided he was seriously engaged in fulfilling his existence as a human person. I love that line, seriously engaged in fulfilling his existence as a human person. That is where Buber challenges us, because who wouldn't want to fulfill his existence as a human person? Walden is not a philosophical tract of unattainable goals, but a relatively simple guide for the perplexed, in which Thoreau asks those questions and answers those questions for himself. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? And how am I supposed to conduct my life? And so if it is just about a man, a person, any person, Walden also represents the possibilities of any person, the possibilities of you and me. And the questions that Thoreau posits in his writings are questions which, if we are truly awake and not just sliding through life with our eyes half closed, we have to ask ourselves, and we must continue to ask ourselves. Thoreau said when he was dying, "I suppose that I have not many months to live, but of course I know nothing about it. I may add that I am enjoying existence as much as ever and regret nothing." Now, I take Thoreau at his word. When he says he regrets nothing, I actually believe that he regrets nothing. And how many of us can say that? How did he get to that outlook on life? And part of the answer comes at the beginning of Walden, where he says, "I went to the woods to live deliberately because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I do not wish to live what was not life, living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary." So how do we get there? As I said earlier, he said, surely joy is the condition of life. And part of it is, I think, of how we look at the world around us. And back in Thoreau's day, the Harvard Divinity School, which is where Emerson trained as a minister, basically the Divinity School taught that miracles were something that happened sort of in the biblical past. Miracles aren't happening now. And you needed a minister to be sort of a conduit between you, yourself, and God. But Thoreau said that the age of miracles is each moment thus returned, and said that men talk about Bible miracles because there were no miracles in their lives. And for Thoreau, there were miracles happening all around him. And I don't know how many of you have been to Walden Pond, but at Walden Pond, there's a statue of Thoreau. And the statue has Thoreau sort of standing there with his hand outstretched, looking at his hand. And we don't know why the sculptor did that. I haven't been able to find anything that the sculptor has talked about why he's done that. But for me, is a reason that fits really well. And that is that Thomas Carlyle, the Scottish writer who was a friend of Emerson's and who Thoreau read deeply and wrote about, Carlyle said, "The God-revealing miracle lies in this, that I can stretch forth my hand." And so if you ever think about it, if you ever think about just putting forth your hand for a minute and wiggling your fingers and think about the millions of years of evolution that went into play to create the human body and all the things that are happening simultaneously in your body to make you move your fingers. It is absolutely and truly a miracle. So regardless of the scientific reasons of what's happening in our brain that move our fingers, it is still miraculous when you think about it. And Thoreau was in awe of the things around him because they represented to him the creation of this earth by God. And he did not like formalized religion, but he was a deeply spiritual person believing in God. And that the world around him, represented by the animals and the trees and the things that are happening in the natural world, were truly, truly miraculous. At one point, Wendell Berry was asked about the Amish because he wrote a lot about the Amish and knew a lot of Amish people. And Wendell Berry answered, "I'm interested in the ability of the Amish to put their community first and to ask if any proposed innovation, what will this do to our community? They're willing to ask that question in the most practical ways, which means that there's no distinction between their economy and their religion. In their daily work, they practice their faith." And then Barry said, "Most of us now can't be Amish, but some of us who aren't Amish have begun to ask Amish questions." And so to echo Barry, most of us now can't be transcendentalists. Well, we actually can be, but that's for another talk. But we can begin to ask transcendental questions, questions that may help us feel that we're on the right track in relation to ourselves and our community, such questions as Thoreau asked in his writings. And so I'm going to read you 8 questions that Thoreau asked in his writings. And I'll kind of pause between each of them so you can hear each question separately without being sort of bumped out of the way by the next. And, there may not be enough time to actually think about them, but you get the sense of what he's trying to do. What may a man do and not be ashamed of it? Who shall say what prospect life offers to another? Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? Why should we knock under and go with the stream? If the bell rings, why should we run? Why should we be in such desperate haste to succeed in such desperate enterprises? Did ever a man try heroism, magnanimity, truth, sincerity, and find that there was no advantage in them? If a man constantly aspires, is he not elevated? I fear that too many people approach Walden, for instance, or any of Thoreau's writings with a very preconceived notion, often based on stereotypically misconceived perception of who this man was. And the images of Thoreau often represent one Thoreau. Thoreau the environmentalist, Thoreau the civil disobedient, Thoreau the hermit of Walden Pond. But confining him to any one of these portraits would be the same as defining you by what you said when you were 20 and finding your freedom in college, or 30 and settling down a bit, or 40 and watching your children make mistakes, or 50 and running a department with 20-year-olds that you can no longer identify with. But the fact is, as I like to tell people, Thoreau was the vegetarian who ate meat. He was a conservationist who surveyed woodlots in Walden Woods. He was a pacifist who endorsed violence. He was a hermit who loved gossip. It's interesting that for a man who spent only 26 months living in the woods that were less than a mile from the town to which he traveled nearly daily, and where he was visited by friends and family, we have this vision of Thoreau as a hermit living some sort of monk-like existence. But that means that he lived nearly 42 years, 95% of his life, living in a town, mostly Concord, but also New York, and as a college student, Cambridge, that we somehow ignore. So barely 5% of his life was spent at Walden Pond. Thoreau wrote, "There are many things which we come very near questioning, but do not question." And so I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things I've questioned. Because when you spend a lot of years reading and thinking about one person like Thoreau. There are things that you say and talk about for a long time, and then one day it just hits you. Something's not right there. So, and I've told the story many times to students down at the pond as we walk around to the house site, how why Thoreau left, how Emerson was going away on a lecture tour to Europe, and that Lydia and Mrs. Emerson wanted someone to help take care of the house and the children and her while Emerson was away. And how Thoreau had lived in the Emerson household before, et cetera. And it would make perfect sense for him to come and live there and help out the family. And I've been telling that story for more than 10 years when I realized something I hadn't seen before. And what it was that Emerson asked Thoreau if he would leave Walden and move back to Bush, the Emerson house. But he wasn't leaving for over 4 weeks. And yet, Thoreau did something that I find very significant, and no biographer has ever talked about it. It's not in any biography. I don't know why. He packed his bags and he left. So the big question is, why? Not why was he willing to help out his friends, because that made perfect sense, but why did he leave Walden 4 weeks earlier than was necessary? And for the majority that equate the name Thoreau and the place Walden as being almost synonymous, for the many who find that Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was the time without which nothing would have followed, that it was the time that made Thoreau, my answer can be a little disheartening. It reminds me of a question from a student recently: could Thoreau have written Walden anywhere else? But I don't think the time that Thoreau lived at Walden Pond was the life-defining moment it has been made out to be. I don't think he would have left Walden so quickly and willingly had that the being there been as important as we tend to believe or like to believe. And I think the true life-changing event for Thoreau was writing about it. And this is where Henry David Thoreau becomes Thoreau. This is where he formulates the questions he's attempting to answer, where he addresses the essentials of the experience, where the writer creates something larger than the life that lived it. He makes the story both personal, so that we cannot think of Walden without thinking of Thoreau, but also universal, so that we cannot think of life, the life represented there, in comparison to our own. I'm telling this because I think it's really important to see that there's no end to how we can look at and interpret something with which we are very familiar. To quote T.S. Eliot, which I very rarely do, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So now I look at Walden differently than I did 10 or 20 or even 50 years ago. Whenever people say that there can't be anything new to learn about Thoreau's life, I think about this reinterpretation of Thoreau's Walden period and know there may be new ways of looking at things or questions we haven't asked. There's always one more question. Hugh Connell. Hugh Connell was Thoreau's cellmate in the jail when Thoreau spent his night in jail. And in any biography that happens to mention this man, never by name, it's all based on one story that was discovered years ago, in which Sam Staples, who liked to have a drink now and again and tell stories, Sam Staples said that Hugh was innocent and was set free. I was always curious about this, so I did a lot of digging and research and figured, well, if Hugh caused a fire and was in jail, he must have been in court. So you check the court records and you find out that Hugh Connell burned down a barn. You find out exactly where the barn is, how it happened, that he was put in jail. And so he was arrested and put in jail. And then he went to court, was convicted of this crime, appealed it, was convicted again, and spent over 5 years in a prison in Boston, Massachusetts. But that's a story you don't often hear because no one's questioning what came before. There's always one more question. I had an intern once who worked for me who wanted to leave flowers on Emerson's first wife's grave. And she said, where is his grave? Where is her grave? And I tried in every resource I had at my disposal, which is a lot, to find out where Ellen was buried. Couldn't do it. So I called up some of the most leading Emerson scholars that were around. And I said, so where's Ellen buried? And I got a couple of very standard questions: West Roxbury or in her father's tomb or grave. Where's your father's tomb? I said. West Roxbury. Where in West Roxbury? I don't know. So after asking all these Emerson scholars, nobody actually knew where Ellen's grave was. So it took literally about 2 years of various kinds of research, not every moment in those time, trying to find out where Ellen's grave was so this person could leave flowers there. There's always one more question. One of the fun ones is who's buried in Thoreau's grave. There's a natural historic photograph, not doctored, not a trick photograph, which shows the tombstones, the stones for Henry and Sophia reversed. They're in different positions than they are now. So the question is, how did that happen? Did the headstones get reversed because they were in the wrong place and then somebody fixed it? Or did they get reversed and they're actually in each other's graves? We actually don't know. There's always one more question to be answered. Or looking at one of the most famous houses in American history, Thoreau's house at Walden Pond. Was there a king post as clearly described by one of his contemporaries, but not in any replica that's ever been made? Where was his closet? Or where was or did he have an outhouse? There's still more and more questions, or myths that persist because we do not question them, such as Emerson visiting Thoreau during his night in jail, which didn't happen, or that he asked permission to live at Flint's Pond, which never happened. There's always another question. Thoreau said, I am grateful for what I am and have. My thanksgiving is perpetual. It is surprising how contented one can be with nothing definite, only a sense of existence. Here or nowhere is our heaven. Emerson said, I am thankful for small mercies. I compared notes with one of my friends who expects everything of the universe and is disappointed when anything is less than the best. And I found that I begin at the other extreme, expecting nothing, and am always full of thanks for moderate goods. So what I want to close with is a couple of passages from his journals, which are, for lack of a better term, feel like a prayer. And it sort of, for me, culminates so much of what I get out of Thoreau. He said, I am eager to report the glory of the universe. May I be worthy to do it, to have got through with regarding human values, so as not to be distracted from regarding divine values. May I go to my slumbers as expecting to arise to a new and more perfect day. May I so live and refine my life as fitting myself for society even higher than I actually enjoy. May I dare as I have never done. May I persevere as I have never done. May I purify myself anew as with fire and water, soul and body. May my melody not be wanting to the season. May I gird myself to be a hunter of the beautiful, that not escape me. Let me forever go in search of myself, never for a moment think that I have found myself. Be as a stranger to myself, never familiar, seeking acquaintance still. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was awesome. I have experienced this lecture a couple of months ago as I was recalling here. But again, there's always something new. And we're really grateful to have you here.
Thank you.
People in the chat, do you have any questions or comments or anything to be shared?
Or not.
Or not. It's okay. We have to digest. Yeah.
There was a lot kind of squeezed into that. So.
Yeah. All right. I think if we don't have any questions, we could perhaps use a little bit of time to talk about perhaps upcoming projects or resources that you might want to share, because this is a platform that we are using for scholarship in general, especially people who don't really have that sort of resource where you can have access to physical libraries and
Mm-hmm.
museums as folks do in Massachusetts. So whatever you feel moved to mention in terms of online resources, the website, it's pretty
Yeah.
much welcomed.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things we're doing on our website, malden.org. One is we have a section called, it's about the Transcendentalists, which is where we're putting more and more information on about each Transcendentalist, but also we're putting texts up online so that we're having more and more writings by the Transcendentalists available. We are going to be putting up a sort of a seminal work done about Margaret Fuller called The Woman in the Myth by Belle Chavigny, which is an amazing work. And we just got permission from her family to put that up. So we'll be doing a digitized version of that soon. We also host something called the Transcendental Log, which is it's an ongoing project. It will never, ever be finished. It can't be finished, but it will literally tell you what the Transcendentalists, any of them, are doing at any moment of their life during like a 60-year period. So you can go in, look at a date and see what's happening. And we started doing it mostly with Thoreau, but we're expanding to include the other Transcendentalists. So over time, we will have the correspondence and the journal entries and where they went each day and who they talked to and all that. So when you're doing research, it's really helpful to sort of put things in real time. So when I was compiling my book, Solid Seasons, about the Emerson-Thoreau friendship, the first thing I did is I took all of their writings about each other and friendship and put them in a timeline, a chronological timeline. And what starts showing out of that is how they interact with each other. So even things as simple that we sort of know about, for instance, when Emerson asked Thoreau about, do you keep a journal? We know that the day before they were discussing journals in Emerson's study. So you get to see all these things. So you don't just know the outcome, you actually know what leads up to it and why they had this discussion or what's going on. So, so we do try to put as much up on our website as we can. So if you're ever looking for a work that is unavailable where you are and you can't make it to our library, and I know a lot of people can't, check with us, email me. If we can digitize it and put it up on our website, if it's public domain, or we can do something, get permission to put it up, we will work on scanning it and getting it up for you. So don't feel like there are things that are inaccessible to you. Let's talk and see what we can do.
All right, Tammy has a question through Transcendental Concord, which is our platform. What is the strangest thing you have at the library?
No one's ever asked me that before. They always ask, like, what's the rarest or what's the most exciting, but the strangest thing. All right, I shouldn't actually tell this, but the strangest thing we have is an egg. So back when the Thoreau Institute was created, there was an auction to raise money for the organization. And one person created a sort of a replica of our building inside of an ostrich egg that lights up when you hit a little button. And I do have to say, and sorry to the creator, but it is definitely the strangest thing we have. I can't think of anything odder than that one. Having said that, we have a lot of amazing things. In fact, one thing we literally just got a few weeks ago was the dining table from the Thoreau family home, the Yellow House on Main Street. So this is the table that was in the Thoreau family home for about the last decade of Thoreau's life. So if you think about the people who visited that home in that decade and who probably sat at that table, aside from Thoreau and Emerson and various other people, we're talking about Frederick Douglass and we're talking about John Brown. So it's quite an amazing piece of history.
I have a question actually in terms of the Concord Museum.
Mm-hmm.
What stays, like, how's the process? What does it look like? What stays in the Concord Museum and what goes to the library? That makes me curious.
Yeah, so we're really two completely separate organizations, but we have a really nice working relationship. So everything stays in the museum that they want to stay in the museum, let me put it that way. But there are certain things that they don't have room for. So for instance, a couple of years ago, they offered to loan us a desk that was Thoreau's desk, in which he kept sort of some specimens, natural specimens. And Sophia had donated it or given it to a neighbor when she left Concord. And that was at the Concord Museum. And they kindly said, we just don't have room to display it. It's just in our storage area. Would you like to display it? And so we now have that in our reading room because of their kindness. So we do have this kind of nice relationship, but most everything at the museum stays in the museum. It was kind of just a special thing that we worked this out with them.
And Tammy also asks, what was the table in the Yellow House until now?
It was in the Yellow House, and then Sophia left it with a local family, and their name's just escaping me at the moment. And it lived in that family or descendants of that family up until now. And they actually used the table as a dining table in their house in New Hampshire. And it was like, oh my God, you're using this table. And the top had been refinished a little bit, so it's not absolutely historical. There's a slight change to it, but still doesn't matter. It's still the same tabletop. And then nobody in that family wanted it anymore. And so they offered it actually to the Concord Museum. And they had no place for it and didn't really have a place in their storage. And they said to me, do you think you'd want it? And I said, yeah. So they told the donor, and the donor said, that's great. So they donated it to us. So it came to us, and it's really wonderful to have that.
All right. I don't think we have any more questions.
That's fine.
But I would like to thank you for this full circle moment where we're spending some time together, and just thank you for your service as a Thoreauvian and as a scholar. And it's just really useful for people who are on a quest for knowledge that's not necessarily always available.
Yep.
And thank you for that.
My pleasure.
And again, I would like to thank you, everyone who has helped me with the organization, and Professor Eduardo, of course. And yeah, thank you for being here, and it was such a pleasure. And thank you for everyone who attended. Take care, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.